Welcome to the Get Published podcast, sponsored by Brodie Consulting Group. To get more information about our coaching, publishing, executive ghostwriting, and podcast production services, go to getpublishedpodcast.com. Hello, I am Paul Brodie, and thank you for joining us for another episode of the Get Published podcast, where we help authors get published with a proven system that works. Today, we're being joined by Jesse Tevelow, author of Authorpreneur. Jesse, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Paul. Happy to be here.
Well, we are thrilled to have you. Are you ready to begin?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. Question number one. What is the one piece of advice that you would give to a first-time author who is currently writing their book?
Yeah, so obviously that's a tough question to answer because there's so many different use cases and unique situations. But I think that fits into my answer, which is make sure you go through the proper planning phase. I think a lot of authors, one of the problems, especially for first-time authors, is they just don't know the process. And the publishing space is quite fragmented these days. There's lots of different approaches. There's lots of different providers. The publishing world is completely different. And so, that's a huge part of what we do with any client that we work with is we try to help them figure out, what they're doing, why they're doing it. And then once they have the goals that they want, then they can figure out the proper strategy because there's just lots of different strategies and you need to make sure you're doing the right one based on what you want to get out of the book.
Absolutely. And what do you feel is the hardest part about getting published?
I think the same thing, just knowing how to do it. That getting published these days, there's a lot of different definitions to what that means. 20 years ago, I think that meant, getting an actual quote unquote traditional publisher to publish the book and maybe having your book in a bookstore, or something like that. But these days it's just completely different because there's hybrid publishers, there's ebooks, there's hard copies, there's print on demand, there's traditional publishers, there's there's the bestseller list, which some people don't care about. So it just depends on sort of what you're trying to do. Just a quick use case and example. Most people, I'm talking to a client right now who's considering doing a book proposal because he's thinking about going to a traditional publisher, but he's not decided yet. He may want to work with a hybrid publisher or something else. So, we're trying to figure that out right now. But if he wants to do a top 5, then we need to have a traditional book proposal, right? That's part of it, and that's challenging. But maybe that's not the right path for him, right? Maybe it's self-publishing or hybrid publishing, and those are different paths. So the hard part is just understanding like why you're doing what you're doing and how you want to publish your book. I've written 3 bestsellers and I've self-published all of them. So, it just depends.
Well, and that's the thing. You got to figure out what's the best fit, and you have to have that holistic approach, as you mentioned. You got to figure out what's going to be best for them because you got traditional, you got hybrid, you got self, vanity. There's so many different ways in which you can go, and it just has to be the best fit for that person, and also finding out what is the outcome. What are they wanting? Are they using this for their business, for their coaching, consulting, speaking? What are the things that they're going to be using it for? And it's much easier to be able to frame the right direction for them after that point.
That's right. Exactly right. I mean, you can publish a book by, putting a file onto Amazon and clicking the publish button, that's one way to quote unquote publish a book, or there's, trying to hit the New York Times bestseller list with Random House, Penguin or something like that. So it just goes back to your approach and why you're doing it the way you're doing it.
Well, let's talk about marketing. And with you, an example, you have moved over 500,000 books. So I'm really looking forward to asking this question, and that is to please share a marketing strategy that you have used in your book launches that has clearly worked well.
Oh, okay. Well, I think I have an interesting answer, which is nothing. And what I mean is, it's an ongoing process. That's how I've moved so many units. I think a lot of people publish a book and they're like, great, once I hit the publish button, I'm just going to get lots of sales. And that's never how it works. So, I've done lots of things. I've kept my books very cheap. That's one way to move a lot of units. Most of the time, my books are 99 cents. I've never really had, I don't think I've ever had my digital copies over a couple bucks. And then I keep my hard copies very expensive. And I do that on purpose because it creates value, a perceived value, but I'm kind of just pushing all my sales to the digital version, because someone comes to the sales page, they see a $25 book or a 99-cent digital version, they're probably going to get the digital version. So those are some strategies I've used. I also give my book away a lot for free. And so, I'm sort of, when I use that number, I'm sort of using a gray area of free copies pushed out and then paid copies pushed out. So a lot of distribution just by giving the book away. I still consider that a unit, right? Because again, I'm not talking about sales. I'm not talking about money. That's not what I'm optimizing for. I'm optimizing for distribution. Right. So free copy still benefits me because I know that puts people into my marketing funnel and into my world. Right. It just creates a communication channel for me. So, this goes back to what I'm saying. I think it's a common thread that the industry is changing and the definitions of everything are changing, and the value that you get out of a book is also changing drastically because you can use it for so many different things that you couldn't really do, 15, 20 years ago.
Well, and you bring up a great point too, talking about the free side. Now, are you referring specifically to having the book free for a few days, or are you talking about having the Kindle perma-free?
No, I keep it paid on Amazon, but off of the book platforms, I'm still talking about my book all the time.
Yeah.
So, I have a business, I have an email list, I have a platform, and I'm constantly talking about my book. That's another reason why I get so many sales, because I'm constantly talking about it. And why is that? It's because I've written my books with a purpose. My first book, I didn't quite think about it as much, but it just so turns out that it really does. It has stayed relevant. And that book's been out for 5 years now. And then the other two books I've written have been very relevant to just my overall ethos and business strategies. And so I can talk about them all the time and I can give them away all the time. And it makes sense for me with the business that I'm building. So, if you're going to write a book and then just forget about it, you're not going to get a lot of sales. I'll tell you that right now. And the marketing process in the pre-launch and during the launch is just as important, but I'm highlighting sort of this ongoing marketing that I do after the fact. I think that's something that a lot of authors miss.
So besides discounting the book, what's the one main piece of advice that you would give to people for be able to market their book and to have sustained sales long term?
Sustained sales long term is just keep talking about it.
Yep.
That's it. I mean, I'm on a podcast right now talking about my book that I wrote 5 years ago.
Yep.
Case in point. So the more you talk, the more you share, the more spread you're going to get. Obviously, there's other nuts and bolts. There's distribution channels. There's platforms. Definitely put it on Amazon because that is 80% of the distribution of books in the world, period. Things like trying to get into bookstores is not as important for pushing units. It's a lot harder, and bookstores are going away. But if you want that as part of your strategy for a specific reason, that's fine. So again, you got to know what you want and why.
Well, I'm talking about podcasts too. You've been on this podcast, and we had you on the virtual summit recently as well. I mean, just getting out there and speaking at every possible opportunity. And as you mentioned, just keep talking about the book. 5 years later, you're still doing it, and you're still driving sales to it. And why is that? Because you keep talking about it. That's the biggest thing.
Yeah, and I mean, there was a long period where I didn't actually as much. My business was going in a different direction. I started a different business, but I was able to come back around to it. That's one of the benefits of a book, is that it's a lifelong asset, and it also will outlive you, which I think is pretty cool. I always tell every prospect or client that we're talking to, like, hey, you're creating something right now that's going to outlive you. And then they go, wow, like that's pretty interesting. And then it makes it a little more dramatic, but that's good. If you're going to write something, you want to make sure you care about what you're putting out there.
Well, especially leaving a legacy too. I'll say the same thing to our clients. I'm like, you're not going to be able to be immortal, but your book has the potential to be, because Amazon's going to be here long after you are and long after I am, because this is one of the best ways just to share your story and to leave a legacy is by having this book out, whether it's for business reasons or just sharing your story to your family. This is one of the best ways to do it.
Yeah, totally agree.
Well, speaking of books, I'd like to know what is your favorite book and what was the number one thing that you learned from it?
Yeah, so it's funny because I actually don't read a lot of books. I know that's a hilarious thing to say, but it's the honest truth. I don't read a ton. I like to put down my thoughts, and it's been awesome to be an author. But I'm not the type of guy that's like, some of the authors are like reading 10 books a month or whatever it is, and it's like how I don't even know how they're doing it. But I have read some, and I think the one that I would say is The 4 Hour Work Week by Tim Ferriss. And the reason is just because that's the book that kind of inspired me to write my first book. I was like, okay, I can do this. And I was seeing what Tim was doing in his strategy and what he did with the book and how he structured the book. And I had some similar ideas for just the type of content I wanted to put out. So that book definitely spoke to me, and I read it at the right time. I think that's another thing about books. Like, you can read a book at the wrong time and you won't like it, or you can read it at the right time and you'll love it. Can I actually give you one more?
Sure.
As a bonus? So 4 Hour Work Week was, sort of very pragmatic. I also really love The Alchemist, by Paulo Coelho. That's another book that I read at the right time. It's a story, fictional story, but it has some really nice morals and just sort of lessons packed away into it. So so that would be another one.
And for a final question, what is your favorite quote and why?
That's an easy one. I use this all the time. It's in, I think, all of my books, or maybe 2 out of the 3. It's super short. The only reason to be alive is to enjoy it. That's it. It's Rita Mae Brown. She was a feminist. I don't even really know too much about her. I saw the quote somewhere one time and I just liked it, and then I put it in my books, and it just stuck. I think a lot of people get caught up in, the complications of life, and I even do that all the time. And I just come back to that quote, and keeps it simple. So that's my North Star.
Well, Jesse, I want to thank you for being a guest on the show. What is the best way for people to find you online?
Sure. You can check out our company, Launch Team, and that's just mylaunchteam.com. Or you can check out my personal site, and that is jtev.me, and it's just jtev.me. And those are the best ways.
Jesse, thank you once again for being on the show, and I wish you all the best in your author journey ahead.
Well, thanks so much, Paul. Appreciate it.
Thanks again for joining us today. To learn more about how you can be featured in our brand new Get Published business book, go to getpublishedpodcast.com.